let's just jump in. I got a good page of questions, and we'll trickle through them.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
That means you have to do the intro.
I got to do the intro. That's right.
All right.
So welcome back to Bonsai Wire podcast. Today I'm interviewing Jonas Dupuy. And I'm Michael Hagedorn, and both of us wrote books this year. And today we'll be talking about Jonas's book, The Little Book of Bonsai. And so it was published earlier this year. This is 2020 for those of you listening to this years hence. Before we start talking on the book, though, I want to talk a little bit about the writing you've previously been famous for, which is your blog. Tell us, in particular, tell us the story about getting the name for Bonsai Tonight.
The Bonsai Tonight blog. This would go back 15, 16 years probably, when a bunch of us were hanging out at a workshop at Boone's house. And it was, Howard Smith, Andy Rutledge, Marco Invernizzi, and I were all hanging out at Boone's, and we were talking about making a satire bonsai site. And we thought it would be funny to share nothing but the horrible bonsai gossip and stories of just some of the really crazy things that would go on. And it would be the TMZ of bonsai. And we were trying to come up with all these different names. And then at some point, someone said, Bonsai Tonight. And as soon as I heard the phrase, I think I just ignored everyone, ran into Boone's house, sat down at his computer, and bought the domain. Because it sounded like a good idea. And I don't remember who said it. Howard's recollection was that it was Andy Rutledge, and that's very likely, but it could have been Marco. I don't remember.
Is right. That is likely.
I want to believe it's me, but anyone who knows Andy would know that that's a very good guess. And so the idea was that it was going to be this snarky site, and we actually took a bunch of pictures. We have funny pictures, very incriminating photos of people at one of Boone's shows years ago. And it was many years later when I actually started the site, which was its own funny side story.
Oh, yeah. So at the time, so you say this is about 15, 16 years ago, it was that the bonsai world was very familiar with the periodical Bonsai Today.
That's right.
So this was, this was going to be the ironic evening entertainment.
Well, and what's funny is, so in the intervening years, I had started a blog where I worked for one of the publishers I worked for. And so in my free time, I was writing articles about institutional repositories of all things, these websites that were set up to show off the scholarly assets of universities and researchers. And when the company found out about it, they made me take it down, and that didn't feel great. And so I said, well, okay, then I'll spend my free time writing about bonsai instead.
Oh gosh. So then when did you start thinking about writing a book?
That was probably, it had been on my mind for a lot of years, but it was probably 4 years ago I actually started doing it. And what I would do is I started writing what became the second chapter while I was taking the bus to work. Yeah, I think back in 2016, something like that. I'd actually proactively started writing after years. And I'd always wanted to do a pine book or another more involved technique book, but I thought I keep answering the same questions on the blog about bonsai basics. And so I really wanted to write something that could be a resource. How do I keep my tree healthy? How do I water it? Where do I put it in the garden? Super basic stuff so that people can keep their trees alive and healthy. Then you can do the fun stuff.
Yeah. So the Little Book of Bonsai, what needle were you trying to thread? I mean, there's been many intro books that have been written, but this one feels different.
Oh, I'd be curious what feels different about it.
Yeah, I could get to a couple of ideas. I had another question for you, but
well, I'll broaden it out.
I think for me it feels like there are the world is full. The book world is full of these sort of crafty how-tos. they're cleverly designed. They're a bit visually exhausting.
Mm.
And this book eludes those traps. And I was wondering if you could talk about that. So it's sort of a two-part question, two-prong. I mean, one is how did you or the publisher avoid this thing that the how-tos tend to fall into, and then for the bonsai community specifically, the bonsai book history, it does feel like there's a different needle that's being threaded here.
So I'd say that's owing to a couple different things. The first of which is just being a book loving person. I had for years before that been buying every other bonsai book I could get my hands on, especially bonsai beginner books, and actually reading them. And what I found is there were a couple patterns that most of the beginning books fell into. And one of them was, as you described, the crafty how-to book. And it boiled bonsai down to a bunch of really straightforward recipes. And I thought that does very little to help anyone actually keep their trees alive or care for anything. It just makes it seem like a nuts and bolts. And then you cut the branch and then you put it in the pot and then you have a bonsai. The other trap that, or I should say, kind of type of content that fills most bonsai books is species guides. And there's
Right,
nothing
right.
easier to write than a dictionary of species guides. And here's a
Mhm.
page about redwoods, and here's a page about maples, and we love spruce. Here's a page about spruce. And the average
Yeah.
bonsai person is not in a club. The average bonsai person is someone who has one or two trees or is thinking about getting one or two trees. And the other 50 to 100 species are just fun to see, but it won't really help them do anything or make anything of their trees.
Hmm.
The other thing
Yeah,
was
that's
I
an
really
interesting
wanted,
point. And you kind of um, dive past that slightly in the book that you've written by dividing, the deciduous, conifer, broadleaf evergreen, and tropical. And so you kind of touch on it, um, but it's not heavily species sort of fragmented into those groups. Um, yeah, yeah.
it's interesting in that there were kind of lots of things like that that came up along the
Mhm.
way. The other thing, which really was hard for me when reading all these other books, is there were very few books that suggested the richness that
Mhm.
bonsai can provide. And so I wanted to make sure the book had beautiful pictures of trees and suggested more of what a more active participant in bonsai could do. So I wanted to suggest, oh, trees
Mm.
can be things other than sticks and pots. We do things like display.
Mm.
There are accent plants, there are gardens. And I really wanted to help people get to the next step. And that's why the entire last chapter ended up being really just next steps. Where do we go from here? What if I want to
Right.
find a tree or find a teacher or visit a garden, and help them transition into that more interested and actively engaged participation with little trees.
I was amazed at the reach that you were able to get out of this book that's 105 pages long, and you get all the way to display and all the way to multiple pages about where to go next, like you just described. For those who might be past or from the gifts of the book have moved toward the intermediate. When I first saw, I was privileged to be part of the early draft of this book, and my initial impression is that it was sort of an introductory book, maybe more than a
Exactly.
beginner book, because it just it felt like it had greater range, and I was incredibly impressed by that. The conciseness of it, and then you were able to pack all that in. Was that by your design, or was the publisher giving you a hook to hang your hat on? You've got 105 pages to write this, or what? What was that?
So the publisher definitely set the page count. They said
Mhm.
right off, they gave me a sample book and said, this is going to be the size and it'll be 112 pages, something like that.
Hmm.
And just because they know printing wise, they're designing
Right,
kind of a package.
right,
But 100% of the content, give or take, was all me. And so this is kind of the other thing I think that made it different, is the whole process of how the book came to be, which was the initial conversation with the publisher when they reached out to me and asked if I could give them, if I was interested, first of all, in working with them, and if I wanted to submit a proposal. And the book proposal is actually where all of this got started.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny is even though they invited me to submit a proposal, I still had to go through the same process as if I was approaching them up front. And the proposal is a really useful document where, in addition to providing a table of contents and a writing sample, most of the proposal is filled with what bonsai books are out there, what's different about this book, what needs or opportunities exist, what is the target audience, and what are the alternatives to buying a book that that you're kind of competing with. And so it allowed me to look at the other bonsai books critically. It allowed me to acknowledge that YouTube and online courses were a great alternative to books these days, as well as in-person interactions. And I think the table of contents I submitted in the proposal 4 years ago was precisely what we ended up with.
6 chapters. Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So before the production phase of the book, in the imagination phase, it's really very clear that the publisher is thinking about what needle it is you're trying to thread, or that you're trying to thread together.
The way they look at it is in terms of market fit. And so they're saying, if you're going to write a book, because there's any number of great books that could be written, what they want to know is there a market for that book? And so they say, who are you writing to? And it's funny, we both came up with a lot of the same ideas. They pretty much wanted me to write the book that I'd already planned on writing. And they wanted a book where the audience was far younger than the average bonsai crowd and far more female than the average crowd.
Oh, wow.
And
so
what's funny is
far. Interesting.
Like we were actually very specific about the age and the demographics and the geographical spread. Like we looked at some really specific things, and I actually had to come up with numbers and samples, and it was a fairly good marketing exercise.
Wow. So could you give us one or two examples of how that would play out in terms of age or gender?
Well, so one of the best ways is, and they solve a lot of this by the designer they hired. The designer they hired was a young woman for the book, and she was fantastic. And just decisions about how many photographs there were going to be is a big part of it. This is not a text-heavy book with a couple of kind of stock small images like in those how-to books where you get these little thumbnails. We wanted to make sure that it was a very light and friendly feeling. We wanted to have a lot of lush images with nice backgrounds and far less of the sterile or dry, everything on a white background, everything shot at the same level photography that we see in most bonsai books.
How engaged were you with the photography? I assume you chose the subjects?
So yeah, the photography I was very engaged with, and that's where one of the many, many strokes of luck, probably the greatest luck I had in this whole project, was getting to work with the editor. And that's when I started learning a lot about what editors do. She pretty much made this book. Lisa Riegel's her name, and she's an absolutely fantastic person and editor, not only from the text perspective, but in terms of coming up with kind of what the whole package will be. And she's the one that connected me to the photographer we ended up using. In terms of what the pictures were, I actually had to submit a shot of all the or a list of all the photos for the whole book far before I wrote the book, which is not easy.
Wow. Oh gosh, that's interesting. That's I was thinking, I don't know why I was musing about this, but movies, what comes first, the filming or the music, or
music's last, yeah.
That was what I came to. I didn't know the answer to that, but that was like, I think you would have to do it that way. But anyway, so that feels a little backwards to me. But does that help the book team?
It's funny. I signed a contract for the book in March, and the draft was due in December of the same year. And within, I think, 4 weeks of signing the contract, I had to provide a shot list of the entire book. So luckily the book just kind of, I knew what I wanted to write. And so I pretty much had to come up with a fairly detailed idea of what topics I was going to cover. And that's what led to the photos. But of course, it was the specifics
Yes.
and the details that made it really hard. And we ended up doing 8, 9, or 10 different photo shoots in
Mm.
altogether. I think it was 3 locations, most of them in my garden. And yeah, it was really tricky to come up. So I was in charge of everything that goes into the photos. And so I had to choose the trees, choose the subject matter, the treatment for it. And then I let the photographer, David Fenton, who's a wonderful guy and a fantastic photographer, he got to completely make the shots. Lucky for me, I got to serve as his photo assistant. And so I
That
got
was
to
my
help set
next
up
question.
everything. I learned a
Great.
ton from
Yeah.
him.
Oh, I bet.
And
Yeah.
we got along great. I had a blast doing the photography, but that was probably one of the most stressful parts of creating the whole book were the photo shoots.
Do you have any tips for us amateur photographers out there for photographing bonsai?
Yeah, the first tip is it's really simple. Hold the camera about 1/3 of the way up between the top of the pot and the top of the tree,
Huh.
which
Okay.
is the level from which we're viewing trees. If you hold the
Uh-huh.
camera there and get far enough away from the tree, bigger the tree, the further away you want to get, and just have a relatively quiet background, not a lot of busy shadows or busy things. So doesn't even matter the color, but so a blankish background and hold the camera at the right level, that's 2/3 of it.
I see. Yeah. And how many light sources was your photography using? Was there a hair light? Was there a third light in there?
Oh, this was great. We had a very precise number of lights for 100% of the shots in the book, and that was the sun.
Oh, wow. You used a lot. Oh my gosh.
He
Did he
is
did he use
fantastic.
any secondary lighting?
We used, other than me holding a reflector, no.
Oh, reflector. Yeah, yeah, that'll do.
So
Yeah,
as I'm
yeah.
looking through the book, even the ones with the dark backgrounds that have like the really dramatic pictures of me holding a wire or the dark background shots, yeah, 100%
Oh
of the
yeah.
shots in the book, there are 0 electric
Oh,
lights. And so I learned a lot about how to use the sun. So the setup was quite involved for these shots, but we used these giant scrims that we shot
great.
through, and we actually reoriented the set throughout the day during photo shoots so we could get the
Oh,
relatively consistent light across the
this
months over
is
which we shot it.
fascinating info. And in your area, you can kind of count on it, at least most days. You can kind of predict what you're going to have and that it'll be there for a while. I remember um, this is now the second time we're talking about movies, but I remember reading something about the shooting of The Princess Bride, and that they were
Oh,
somewhere in the United Kingdom, and they were sitting down for hours chatting, waiting for the lighting to change so that they could actually shoot a particular scene. I imagine you didn't have many days like that with your photography.
yeah, the main variability is whether there was sun or cloud. And so we would kind of shoot
Yeah.
different things like that. But it's
Mm-hmm.
so interesting coming up with the photos for this. You think, oh, I take photos of trees all the time. That's a big part of what I do. And when you
Right.
do a book,
Right.
it's like, oh, Jonas, do you have a show ready semi cascade tree next week? Like if I
That's a
ask you,
different
Michael,
problem.
could you give me a formal
Yeah.
upright bonsai for
Right.
a book that you want to, you'll be happy with this image for the next 10
Right.
years?
Right. Oh
Do you
gosh, I
have
can
that
think of
in show
one,
shape at
right.
any random time of year next week?
Right. That is a challenge. That's a real challenge. Yeah. And the blog work that you do in your photography, you can pick the thing that is most interesting that week.
That's what I
um,
do. And you can go as
yeah,
deep as you
right.
want on that one topic. Trying to
Right.
go general and
Wow.
have great
Wow.
photography is quite a different task. And I relied on so many friends for this. I think 8 people and the local bonsai garden at Lake Merritt all very graciously
Mm.
provided trees for me to use. And so I
Oh,
was
great.
constantly trying to figure out people's schedules. When could I go to their house, pick up a tree, bring it back, make sure it was totally show ready, get the pot ready. And then I'm helping the photographer at the same time. So it would often take 1 or 2 days prep time for every photo shoot, then a full day for the shoot, and then usually a day of other stuff after the shoot.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Um, wow. I want to dip back a little bit more into the content of the book.
Uh-huh.
Going back to a comment you made about how much you wanted to focus on care of the tree, and you have 7 pages on pests and diseases, 9 on watering. Fully 1/6 of the pages are on these kind of non-idyllic parts of bonsai. And you obviously, even in your blog and now in your book, you care about the success of particularly newcomers by placing those topics front and center. I was really delighted to see that, because that's one of the things that I see in my students too, is that they don't really want to talk about that, but you kind of have to force the issue, and you did a beautiful job in the book.
And those are two funny examples because uh, we were trying to, that was definitely threading the needle. You want people to be successful, but you don't want to be scary, but you don't want to kid them either. And
Oh wow,
so
yeah,
the,
right. Yeah,
another way, so just as
not
hard as it
easy.
is to say, oh, find me an informal upright XYZ type of tree, like, Michael, could you give me a show ready deciduous or a broadleaf, a tropical? There you go. Show me an informal upright tropical show ready tomorrow. Can you do that? That's a tough one.
Gosh,
And so for
I couldn't.
care,
Yeah.
for the watering, it's like, okay, this is someone who's our target audience was someone with either 0 or 1 trees. They're either thinking about buying a bonsai, they're buying it a gift for someone that may
Right.
have 1 bonsai, but that's the target audience.
Okay. Okay.
And
Then I think you nailed it, because that was my impression of it. Even in the draft phase, it
oh,
came
good.
loud and clear that this was a very concise book that wouldn't overload somebody. And that, I mean, it's an incredibly clean feeling book. The images and the text are highly curated, and they focus attention with almost no sort of chaff information or words or images or any of the stuff that I was talking about with these sort of cute, craftsy how-to books. I
Which are
think
so
it's
easy
a
to
really
produce. Yeah.
well-produced book. It's
Oh,
beautiful,
thanks. The
beautiful.
pests, that was all the editor. And
Mm.
so the editor worked in 18, had worked at the time for 18 years as a garden editor, and she knew a lot. And so
Oh, you're kidding.
she actually, oh yeah, she knows gardening cold, and she knows the garden book industry very,
Oh,
very
wow.
well. And she's produced a lot of successful titles over the year, which is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
And the publisher is a division. 10 Speed Press is a division of Penguin Random House, so they had kind of unlimited resources and quality people that they deal with. But she wanted me to do the garden and pest part. I'd actually written far, far less, and she thought, well, can you give people tips for what are they most likely to encounter, and what are the and so I did that, and then I had to do another draft. It's like, well, what are some simple things you can do about that? And it's like, okay, this is someone who's never gardened before. They might live in Alaska. They might live in Florida. I have to make sure that the cultural care can apply to someone at anywhere in the country, and really start to explain it from the perspective of someone who really has never had to care for and nurture a small tree in a container.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a big umbrella, especially climatic differences. That's a super challenge. Super challenge. Um, I'm curious. Did you have any unexpected challenges when you're writing, either with the writing or with production of the book? This is your first book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of it wasn't an unexpected challenge. So at the time when I started writing it, I had been, several years into doing bonsai work full time, and had really, I didn't know where free minutes in the day would come from to work on the book. And interesting, as a coincidence would have it, the day I signed the contract for the book was the day I pulled a permit to build my workshop out back. And so I pretty much had to start waking up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning and working on the book for a couple hours before going into my normal, 10, 12, 15-hour days that I was working at the time.
Oh,
And so it was just challenging to physically do it. And I knew it would be hard to write it, but it ended up being much, much harder than I expected to write, because that same day, actually, I
yeah.
published my 900th blog post. So I can't say that I was a stranger to writing about bonsai, but blog
No.
posts, which are not super easy, are 100 times easier than writing a resource like this for a different audience at a different level. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
just finding time to write was hard.
Mhm,
Finding the ability to
mhm,
write in a general fashion was hard. Trying to just find the trees or the time to prep the trees at any time of the year was challenging. And if I could do it all over, probably the biggest thing I wish I'd done differently is I wish I had a complete draft of the book done a year ahead of time. I wish I could have given it to more people
mm,
ahead of time and then could have been deeper into the drafting before I started working with the editor.
mhm, mhm. How long did the project take in all once you had
Let's
started?
see. So if I signed the contract in March of 2018, turned in the first draft in December of 2018, it wasn't published until January of 2020. So there was over a year of production after that first draft
Mm,
was due.
mhm, mhm,
And so there was maybe 4, 5, 6 months of intense drafting. And I threw away close to 100% of
mm,
the words in a few of the chapters and had to do it again and again. The first chapter was particularly tough. And, uh, and then we were doing the photo shoots during that time. The production work
yeah,
itself
yeah.
wasn't bad. The layout and monkeying around and the captions, that was a lot of work, but it wasn't as trying.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So you're really well known for your concise use of language. Do you do much editing? When I hear you speak and when I read your blog or read your book, it feels like it's real close to maybe what it was the first time you put your pen to paper or were tapping on the keyboard. What is writing like for you?
Oh, that's a fun question. I've been interested in writing as a pastime, as a profession, and as whatever else it can be in life, or just a student of learning of how it works for a really long time. I remember I took a ski trip in 5th grade and ended up writing a probably 25, 30-page version of this 1-day ski trip at 11 years old or whatever I was. And that was just for fun. I don't even know if I did that
Wow.
for a school assignment. And so I was a big reader and really enjoyed writing at a young age. And I went to grad school because the only thing I enjoyed or what I enjoyed more than anything as an undergrad studying literature was tutoring and helping people learn to write. And so I went to grad school with the idea of becoming a teacher, and I went through a whole program to learn how to teach composition. And my first job after grad school was actually as a technical writer, where I was writing policies and procedures, where I had to be concise. And so I've
Oh
had a
gosh.
lucky and long history of writing professionally in a lot of different settings. And whether it's responding to art in the form of literature, or in terms of how do you find the most effective way of getting people to understand abstract concepts.
Wow.
I mean, I
Wow.
literally wrote procedures for how to
Yeah.
close affordable housing
Yeah.
loans for a long time.
Oh wow. Okay. Gosh, your depth of experience in many different fields has always surprised me. I actually didn't know a couple of those pieces. I didn't know that you had a degree in composition. I knew your
Well, the
undergrad
degree
was
is
in English.
literature,
Yeah.
but I did
Oh,
it
literature. Okay,
was
I'm
a
sorry.
certificate. It was a certificate program on top of that for.
Okay,
I wrote about Salman
teaching
Rushdie. That
composition.
was actually my the
Oh
master's
wow.
thesis.
Oh no, kidding. I never
Yeah,
read any of his.
metaphor in Midnight's Children,
Oh gosh.
which is a hilarious book and a wonderful read. I highly recommend it.
Oh my. Well, I remember years ago when we were studying with Boone, and I think a couple times I stayed with you at your apartment
Uh huh.
in your spare bedroom, and it was great to have a place to land because back then I was a potter. I had trouble affording hotel rooms. It was it was a pretty narrow existence.
Potter and
But
poverty sound similar, don't they?
yeah, unfortunately, I mean, there's some that do really really well. Some of my colleagues, I went to school for ceramics and knew many potters who did a great job. But the thing that always amazed me about your house and what you were doing there, and you were definitely a reader. I mean, that was something that really struck me. You had millions of books, really interesting books, not just books, but really, really interesting books. And you had one of these kind of lectern-like things that you would put on top of a table. It was like on your kitchen table, and you would open a book, and it had this little. Do you still have this? And it had this little piece of wood strip at the bottom, so the book wouldn't slide off. It was on an angle, and so you could be like flipping through the pages while you're like eating your cereal, or so, at least that's what I meant. I never saw you doing this, but it was obviously for a book. You were always engaged with reading, and then there were in a corner you had a piano, and he gave you this long lecture about Gould, and you played a little bit, and I felt like I was in the presence of a polymath. I mean, you had a lot of ability in a whole bunch of different areas.
And bonsai,
and it comes through. I mean, I think it comes through in the lack of a need to impress, in using extraneous language, and I think that's one of the reasons that your blog is so popular, and I know it's going to be one of the reasons that this book is going to continue in its current popularity. And I think it's classic. Actually, I've sought for a long time to tell newcomers, or somebody would ask me, hey, a friend of mine just got a bonsai, and where do I go? How can I help my friend? And I've had a difficulty, other than sending them to blogs and maybe some videos, finding a book that I recommend. And in the day, there were some good books, but we have different information now, and we needed a book that was like up to date, and concise, and not overwhelming for somebody who is just getting in. And your book hits it right on the head.
Well, thank you. It was it was a really fun target, and it's funny, in hindsight, the whole thing was an awesome exercise to go through. I think I learned a lot about writing, or what it means to be an editor. We can go into that later too, but I do want to clarify this. I would love to live in the house you just described. You made it sound so romantic. All of these great books and the piano and sitting around talking about Glenn Gould, which I still do, I will admit. But the lectern was a box of Kleenex and two, the cardboard backing in a lined paper pad. It was two of those cardboard backings that I had propped up against the Kleenex box. And my girlfriend made fun of me forever for having this, and made me get rid of it, actually. And
it's
what I would do is
memory changes things. I don't remember that at all.
Well, you wouldn't have seen the Kleenex box. You would have just seen this ground, which is why it looked like wood. It was cardboard. And what I would do is, that's true. 3 meals a day, I would eat always reading, and it was always magazines. And I remember at the time I was reading Atlantic and Harper's cover to cover, and it's funny, I still read both, and that's what I was always reading during meals when I was on my own. That's so funny.
Oh gosh. I've always been impressed by the Atlantic. It's just incredibly in-depth articles and reporting. Really interesting.
Both of those are treasures. They're great.
Yeah. Glenn Gould. I still remember Glenn Gould.
Luckily, I moved on from Glenn Gould. There's more to life than Gould, but I do have.
You have? Okay.
Yeah, my girlfriend taught me that there are more instruments than just piano, and
oh wow!
Now I can talk at equally great length about such wonderful figures as whether it's Mahler or Wagner or you name it, and I can. Wow. I can now name many of the great violin concertos, as I should. So.
Oh gosh. But not only that, I mean, you went on to learn Japanese, so that on your trips to Japan, you could converse. And I remember, struggling. This was years ago. I don't remember if I was in an apprenticeship at this point or not, but I was trying to make some kind of communication with somebody at the vendor area of the Green Club, and off in a corner, you were having a 20-minute conversation with someone else. I felt deeply underwater. It was
Uh,
that's
you'd feel, if you knew enough Japanese to know how poorly I know it, you'd feel a lot better.
Right. Yeah, it must have been before my apprenticeship. I was able to get by, once I was, kind of needed to swim.
Yeah.
But the chit chat, I think you had gone into the chit chat where you can talk about, changing out the wood floor in the house, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I hadn't ever really reached that level. I think I kind of stopped at the bonsai language.
Bonsai proficiency.
Absolutely. Bonsai proficiency. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, I
okay.
need to work on my bonsai proficiency because that's probably the number one thing. I've actually lately I've been trying to study some more, because when I go to Japan, by far, my top priority is to speak with growers, to visit new gardens, find out how they get the results they make, and because I want us to be able to make more trees. We can't just keep digging them up, because there's a lot of different kinds of bonsai and things we need to do with them. And so I'm really keen on figuring out ways we can make them.
Yeah, great. So, um, getting back to books, do you have another book in mind?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple different books in mind, and one of them I've already created the table of contents. I've already kind of created.
Oh,
I know
yeah.
exactly who it's going to be for and how it's going to work. It's just a matter of deciding if I really want to start waking up at 5 a.m. again to write it. And the one thing I'll say about it is the goal of the book is to help people figure out on their own how they can be kind of independently successful with bonsai. And the reason for this is, what I've found is we now, I think, have just awesome resources in terms of videos, in-person classes, online resources, online classes. We have tons of great things we can recommend to people depending on their interest. You've done an online course. I'm looking to do one of those as well. But what I'm finding is that just as the books fell into a lot of common traps, a lot of these other resources fall into the trap of providing people with recipes. Do what I say. Here's how you do this. Here's when you do this. And what I'm finding is, and this is something I would not have learned without writing a blog that has readership in quite a wide variety of places, is, well, when is your spring? When does your tree go dormant? Does your tree go dormant? How do I know if my tree is healthy? How do I know if it's ready for this new phase of development? And I would love to create a resource that's more of a guide to give people starting points to know where they are with their trees, some suggestions for what techniques might be appropriate depending on where they are with their trees, and then some kind of signposts that they can refer to know whether or not they can kind of evaluate their own success with what they've done with their own trees.
Yeah, well, there's your education background coming through. I believe that well, certainly in the States to some degree, fairly heavily in Japan. Once once you get into the high school and whatnot, much of the education is kind of paint by number. It doesn't really teach you how to think. It teaches you data, and that system doesn't really help you much later in life when you encounter a situation where that data doesn't apply. So that sounds like a really useful project. Yeah, I like.
And I don't know if anyone other than me wants that book to exist, but it's the same thing. Part of me finds it really. Part of me finds it very easy to identify a technique and tell you everything I know about that technique. Here's how I found this. Here's how it works. Here is what you can expect. Expect Y if you do X, and then it's up to you to decide if X or A or B or Omega is a better approach for your tree. But I've always found it more interesting. For me, the sign of a successful workshop is when someone can go home and do something they couldn't do that morning. Not that they took home a tree that looks better, because then I'm just,
right.
I know I can work on their trees, and that's fun. And I think it has its place. It's a big part of how I learned, but far more interesting to me to watch people do things that they couldn't do before, to see the light bulb go off in above their heads. That's what I get a kick out of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to give, it's hard to give a package. It's like, okay, here, you take this away, and that'll serve all your needs. but to give, to at least be able to throw a better set of tools in that package, is a really worthy endeavor.
It's interesting when we think of different criteria for success. Is criteria for success,
right,
I made your tree look beautiful, or is the criteria of success, you now understand how to pick the front better, you now know how to form an apex?
Yeah, and there's, as you said, there's a place for, I do the work on your trees. There's, our community is multifaceted, has different sub communities. There is, as you said, that the person who has one tree. There's I just wrote an essay about this.
Oh, fun.
about the people call you up and say, I had this tree, and it's it was given to us as a housewarming gift 30 years ago, and it's always done well, and this year it doesn't look so good, and we might need a little help. I mean, they never repotted it, they've barely fertilized it,
I know that
and
person.
the tree is fine. And yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're out there. They actually had, these are the people who didn't kill their first tree. They just whatever, the stars align, and they just everything sort of works for them. There's that group, and then there's a group that you and I really engage with in teaching, and trying to give them a toolbox so that they can help themselves and make their own decisions that go beyond paint by number, but reach into the creative. And then there's a whole nother set of the community that have bonsai. They might be, the biggest thing in their lives outside of their careers, and they're as engaged with bonsai as anybody, but they don't touch the trees. They water, they fertilize, and then people like you and I help them maintain beyond that. So there's at least three big, and maybe there's more. I might be oversimplifying, but there's big different group. And then there's the parts that are part of clubs, and then there's people who would never be part of an organization. So that splinters there a little bit as well.
I think that's a useful trifurcation. You have the practitioners, the appreciators, and the initiates.
Oh wow, that's
what's interesting
is very well put. Nice.
And they overlap really well in that I've known, and this is what was so great about Boone's organization, which I know you're really familiar with, in that a lot of people had the trees that they played with, but they really appreciated outstanding material, and that they would have Boone, in that case, help them with that material. And so they knew, it's like they really loved interacting with trees that were better than they knew they could maintain them. And that's where these neat relationships kicked in. So I don't think of any of these categories as exclusive. Ultimately, I want there to be more beautiful trees in the world. And so I think of everything I do as a piece of the puzzle. Is, I'd love to be able to go to more shows with more beautiful trees. And it takes a lot of different things to do that. I could just make beautiful trees and ignore the rest, but if I can help make an army of people who either understands what a good tree look like or how to make a good tree, I know that at some point in the future, there will be more fun trees for us to look at.
Wow. Yeah. You approach your work with bonsai with a pretty clear philosophy. That's
for like 20 years now.
Impressive.
It's really funny.
Yeah. Nice.
And it's great because it's selfish in that I literally want to see more beautiful trees and not just trees that I made. Because
you're not inadvertently helping people, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But I will say it's an enlightened self-interest guiding
That's
all of this.
Lincoln's altruistic puzzle. Do you remember that one? I forgot
No.
what it was. Yeah, there was something. It's like, yeah, if I get out of my carriage to help somebody else who's stuck in the mud or something, I
Ah,
apologize if
yes,
I'm
yes.
getting this wrong. It's like it's not actually altruistic because it makes me feel better. Or
Right.
something along those lines. And it was one of those philosophical puzzles, that you had to
Yeah.
tease apart.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. But it's interesting, what parts of this of anything that we do, start as something that's a little bit selfish out of curiosity or something, and then as we dig into it selfishly, we realize that actually we can be of benefit to others.
And it's funny,
Uh,
and I think selfish, I wish we had a better word. It's less
yes,
selfishness and
yeah.
more, it's a deep enthusiasm for engagement in something. That's really what it is. And
Hmm.
I find it fascinating to look at interesting trees. And I'll admit, I'm terrible. I was at Kokufu earlier this year in February in Japan, and I love wandering around the exhibit. And it's funny, you after a while, you find the times when there are fewer people and you can just kind of buzz around to different trees and look inside of it. And whenever I would see people, and I've even
Yeah,
done this
yeah.
occasionally, I've even started conversations with Japanese people, which is probably horribly embarrassing, but I will find someone looking at a tree and I'll think, ooh, that's one of my favorite trees in here. And I'll just walk over and say, oh, did you look at the underneath the canopy to see what's going on inside? Oh, no, I haven't. And you'll see the person crane their head and look underneath and, oh, wow, I didn't expect that at all, because
Hmm.
some trees are just tied in knots in the middle. And we see these boring, what people are
Hmm.
categorizing as boring helmets on the outside, which are actually incredibly finessed and very finely crafted, even though I know that's super not trendy these days. But on the inside, there were some absolutely fascinating, see, there are these great decisions
Absolutely.
that have been made that have got us to that point. And
Right,
it's,
right. It,
it's like me in a museum. I'm staring 2 inches away from the painting. I'm walking 20 feet away and squinting my eyes. I'm finding all these
uh,
ways to find what's the form, what are the value, what are the hues, what are the different things the painting's bringing, and what are the brush strokes to provide this great effect. Bonsai is the exact same way.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of the great benefits of being in person at a show. One of the things we're missing this year, but
Yeah.
traveling to one of these shows where exceptional trees. There's several shows in Europe that are absolutely unbelievable as well, and to be able to crane your head and see it in a way that you didn't in a photo book, that can lead you to. Denigrating the helmet and
Yeah.
and teach you.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
Just hearing you say these things reminds me of when I take pictures of people in exhibits, I often prefer the pictures where someone really is craning their head
Mm.
and trying to puzzle out what
Mm-hmm.
makes the tree look the way it does or what makes the tree look compelling. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I'll
Mm-hmm.
always enjoy talking with non-bonsai people about bonsai because they tend to have pretty good insights about the trees, not knowing what they're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And actually, it was as you were saying about the craning of the head, it reminded me that in at least some circles in Japan, that's considered a bit impolite. And yet, the
Mhm.
bonsai professionals are craning their heads and
Yeah.
peeking underneath the skirts of the tree. And I think we should. Well, that's sort of that's not going to be impolite to most Westerners.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember my very first morning in
yeah,
Kokufu, back my first
yeah.
trip to Japan in 1999. It was packed, and it was for those who haven't been, the exhibit is laid out in a way where there is a single path you follow, and there are often those little pedestrian traffic guides that you follow, and you go up one side of the aisle and
Right.
down the other side of the aisle, and you actually walk through all of the large trees and then all of the medium trees and then all of the small trees, period. That's just how you see Kokufu. And in the old days when it was really, really busy, you would literally, it's just like imagine taking 1 inch steps, step, 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 step. And then you get in front of a tree, you turn your head 90 degrees, and then you turn back forward, step, 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 step. And it's just like that for the 2 hours it takes to get through it all, which that's a horrible experience. It's really hard, but you only even have the chance to look at it straight on, and that's it. Have you been there in those really busy times like that?
I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Before my apprenticeship, I went over with a group of people. I think Boone was part of that group, and that was incredibly busy. It
Yeah.
wasn't much better than seeing a photograph.
Yeah, it's
Other
funny.
than sculptural scale, that
Yep.
was the only benefit you get, and that is actually a pretty powerful benefit.
I still remember the first
Everything
pine I
changes.
saw on that trip. I still remember the first jojoba I saw on that trip. The
Oh,
scale, just you hold your arms apart and think, yeah, that's how big the tree was. That you don't get in a
yeah,
book.
right, 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 and a sculptural scale changes our relationship with the object. Um, it kind of places, if it's big enough in particular, it really places you in your place. um, and the emotion changes. And that's one of the biggest problems with our beautiful exhibition books, from the Kokufu show, for example, when you have your large trees only twice as big as the shohin.
Yeah.
I mean, that'll really screw up any possible accurate, well, accurate is maybe the wrong word, but true experience of the work. Yeah.
I could not agree more. And that we need to do an entire episode on, which would be
Okay.
squaring off shohin versus large trees. As I
Oh
often
dear.
argue, there is a really big difference between them. And you put
Yes.
you put
It's
your
almost a
finger
different
on it.
art form. Yeah.
Yeah, in many ways, it
Yeah.
is a different art form. And I think it all comes down to the emotional response we have based on the size of the thing. It actually,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
argue it's a thing. I think that'd be a fun thing to argue. Maybe I should write an essay on that as well. I'll
That'd
have
be
to wait for
excellent.
your next book. I'm sure it'll be in there.
Excellent. Yeah, right. Another interesting, just to, sort of a comparative thing, is deciduous and conifer, because I think how we create deciduous is so different that it's very nearly a different art form.
Couldn't agree
That
more on
would be
that
another
too.
that would be another one for maybe a round table.
Yeah, and I think the abstract for that would be the you could look at the just just to take two basic camps for how you create, there's a third I'd say, but two basic camps of how you create either bulky deciduous trees or non-bulky. I'll just keep it that simple. Um, Ends up creating trees with completely different feelings, and let alone the whole concept of the characteristics trees take on based on the relationship with the people who are creating or caring for those trees. And that's
Yes.
also super out of fashion right now, which is kind of beyond me because that's always been my very favorite part of bonsai. And I tried to make that come through in the book. But I think
Yeah. Yeah.
deciduous is your ideal. You can't not engage with that aspect of bonsai when you're looking at deciduous trees.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's really
Mm-hmm.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Um, it's a tricky dance when you're building a deciduous tree because you kind of have to look into the future that doesn't exist yet, and that's so much different than, let's say, you had a collected conifer, where something you can finish in a day. You don't have that other piece, that unknown future, or the future you're trying to create. It doesn't, that's not a piece of the puzzle that's there. And frankly, in some ways, creating good deciduous is harder
Well,
um,
so
because of
though
that extra piece.
having grown conifers from scratch, it's that same extra piece. It just looks different along the
Conifers,
way.
that's right.
If you're
Yes,
starting
I'm
from
sorry, young
scratch.
conifers. Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely. It still
Well,
includes it. Yep.
if
Yep.
you're willing, I'd actually like to go into this a little bit because it ties to something about
Wow, let's do it.
something I thought a lot about for a beginner book, which is a lot of times people ask me, what's hard about the book, or, what went into the first chapter. And it makes me want to ask people, okay, what does a bonsai look like? I don't know what bonsai is. What makes something look like a bonsai? And
Hmm.
you start getting into these really abstract, you get really abstract really fast. Oh, it's an asymmetric triangle. Great. So like Mount Fuji, but one side of Mount Fuji is bigger than the other. You're like, yeah. And it just, those phrases only work when you know it. And like other things, if you know it when you see it to some
Right.
degree. And so before you know to see it, it's tricky. You were just talking about it's hard to make
Right,
something
right.
that's not there yet. And I have found that probably the single hardest thing to teach is how to get people to see something before it's there. And I kind of purposefully didn't put that in the book, but I did try to provide a ton of cues as setup for that being the next step. And I'd
Huh.
love to hear, or maybe we can talk about that for a little bit. How do you
Hmm.
get people to see what's not there
Hmm.
when you're
Wow.
making a tree from scratch or developing something
You
from
know,
an
that's
early stage?
so interesting. I have found, much to my surprise, this year. Now, how long have I been teaching bonsai?
Yeah.
I I still think the best way to learn bonsai is in person.
Yeah.
However, I have been so surprised that in teaching this online course, this seasonal light series of courses, that in flattening things to the two dimensions has allowed me to present conceptual information that students then can grasp easier and apply to 3D, where I was really, really struggling to share with them these concepts in 3D in person. We talked about the light bulb over the head. Seeing the light go on, in their eyes was rare and I see it happening more on on
Mm.
these Zoom calls doing these presentations because there's something about flattening. There's something about taking one element out
Yeah.
to the depth confuses things and we have a lot of difficulty processing 3D in art. I think sculptural forms are incredibly difficult. So I think that would be my first answer. What I've done is I've started to take videos of. So we're talking about young plants. In fact, we did this time for the fall seasonal light. We took a young Itoagao juniper, which we've been growing for from a cutting for 7 years. So it's this scrappy little tree, right? It's got now it's got a 2-inch trunk and it's a lot of information in it from the wiring that we've done, but it looks like a mop. How do
Mm-hmm.
you how do you explain is the wrong word, but how do you share taking that to step two, which is taking out the things you don't want? And the easiest way I could do that is these in the round videos. So I
Mm-hmm.
would I would just literally have. I think John was being Vanna White as he was turning the turntable really slowly. So we got an image of the tree. Um, uh, After work so you can see the choices that were made. But even that is better than 3D. I mean, it's two dimensions, even though the video, and when you're turning it, you're getting the sense of 3D. But photographs are really powerful. I can share design concepts much more concretely in two dimensions. I can do this abstraction that you're talking about, even taking it away from tree. One of my favorite wiring exercises is to take the. I think we learned this from Daichan. We talked about cutting a branch off, and then you put the branch in a vise, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
wire that branch, and then you take a photograph of it. At least this is what I should suggest to take a photograph of that, and then you take all the wire off, and you try to do it simpler, still with good anchors, and so you're cleaning up your technique. All you're thinking about is wire planning, and you're divorcing this whole idea from a tree. So that's what I'm trying to do with design, and in making these early choices that are sort of taking stabs at moving toward a future you can't see yet.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge. But I'm very surprised that two dimensions is helping me share some of these ideas with students.
Well, it's funny. A lot of things come up from that, and the flattening one is interesting. I think when you're looking at a tree, we process it as I see the tree. What? What do you want me to see? I see the tree. It's there. I see it. It's like I think our brains are actively engaged in identifying that it's a tree or that we're seeing it. It's like, well, yeah, that's the right branch, that's the left branch, I see that, but how do you know where they go? How do you know what they do? And I think the flattening might help us or help free us up to think of it in a more abstract term where, well, should the branch be here? Should the branch be there? Not I see it or is it there? It's more like, oh, let's aim for this kind of form or that kind of form. What's funny is I know that none of us learned these ways. And one thing I know that we know is effective is you actually don't explicitly teach any of these things. And what you do is you just give people a ton of exposure, you respect their time, and you have them spend as much time as possible hands on the trees, not talking, not listening, not reading. They can do that on their own. You have them hands on, and over repeated exposure and a repeated experience, that's when they start to figure it out. And by giving people trees they don't need to worry about, I find the learning can happen a lot faster. Because if it's their precious, they don't want to mess it up. If you hand them something and say, your goal is to learn, not to make it beautiful or to do XYZ, you really want to just make it their goal to learn. It frees them up. And then having done it, oh, I bent that branch over and now it's the top of the tree. Ah, gotcha. And you just do that enough and enough and enough. And some people will happen to learn. And I think what we're trying to do is, well, how would you teach this intermediary step? And it's really interesting. I guess the proof will be in the pudding is, do you make more better bonsai students with the approach that we learned from, or the one that we're sharing with other people? Time will tell.
Yeah. Right. Might be an integration of several different modes of looking at something.
But seeing things that aren't there, I think that's one of the magic bits of bonsai, and it's why I like growing trees from scratch so much. I think it's really interesting.
It's a real challenge. A lot of failure. I mean, this is where kind of the refuse pile, the ones that didn't make it, or you try and find a home for it, but ones that didn't quite reach your goals of aesthetics.
Well, what's funny is if you keep going, they often get good.
That's true too. Yeah. If you keep kind of fighting with it, maybe that's the wrong word, but change the game a little bit. So if you were working for a certain size, I think I've made this point before on the podcast, but you grow it into the next larger size.
I love
then
that
you
tip.
Totally change the map. I mean, suddenly, the map doesn't end at the borders of this country. It includes, the next 3 countries, and then you develop richness through that.
I've been sharing that tip of yours a lot with people, and it gets really handy. It's like, oh, well, the first branch is up too high. Not if it's 5 inches taller.
Right. Speaking of 5, okay, going back to the book briefly.
Oh, this is good.
Is there anything that you include in the little book of bonsai if you had 5 more pages?
I don't know that's a good question. I don't know what I would include if I had 5 more pages. There are a couple of things I might have included even within the same amount of space I had. What I'm finding is it's really interesting. As people interact with the book, I'm going up not against what they should or shouldn't be learning, but what they expect to be learning.
Oh, okay.
And I'm finding when you're at the first step of the journey, that's far more important. And I think the reason for the success of these very bland, how-to crafty books is they feel complete. The overwhelming number of hundreds of bland photos convey completeness of the topic. Oh, look, there's 50 trees in here. Oh, this one has 100 different species. I'm going to get that one. And you're automatically satisfied because you can tell yourself you bought the right book because it is so complete. And
so what you're saying is you've ended your book with an incomplete sentence.
Well, and that last sentence,
that's great.
Yeah, I want the reader to kind of complete it in different directions.
I love that.
And so, I've got feedback that
that's really
I didn't, that I could have said more about soil composition, which is deeply ironic because I'd feel comfortable pretty much having a discussion about different kinds of soils used anywhere in Japan or the United States. I'd happily have that conversation with anybody. It's not that I don't know that topic really well, but when I think of my target audience of people with 0 to 1 trees,
Right.
poor soil or soil choice is the cause of death in close to 0% of cases. But when you start joining a club and learning about bonsai, it's the alpha and omega. Oh my God, soil this, soil that. But the start, no, soil's not killing trees. Not watering it when you go on vacation is killing trees.
I would agree with that, because that one person that we were talking about that's had their tree for 30 years, and there's a surprising number of them out there.
Bad soil to start with, and no repotting.
They didn't change out. Yeah, they didn't change out the soil. They're not using akadama.
Yeah. So that's a good question about what I would add in there. Probably it'd be fun to just enjoy the process a little bit more. And I wanted to give a round overview of the different things you can do with bonsai. And so whether we did a second from scratch, step-by-step tree, or just do it far more fully, make that the bulk of the book, where okay, how was the decision made to remove this branch or that? How did we move from that? And that's actually kind of a funny story. The step-by-step initial styling of the tree. There's a couple funny things about that. Right in the middle of the book, it's we take a 2-gallon field-grown juniper, grown by my friend Dylan, who did a just amazing job growing that tree, and it makes it look so simple. You just take a tree, find a nice angle, cut off branches that you don't need, maybe gin what's left, just wire everything else by more or less pointing it down, and all of a sudden it looks beautiful. And then look at that, we repotted it all at the same time. So I really wish we could, and there's a lot of blank space on the page. It looks really simple. But so two funny things are going on there. I wish we could provide a lot more intermediary steps into how to make those decisions. But I also know from reading even Kinbon in Japan, it's really hard to take pictures of individual branches because the trees are so busy and it's hard.
Yeah. And this is thin enough. I see you have one photograph where it's shooting down on a branch so that you can see the structure of it. And
I made them add those 2 photos actually.
Oh, you did? Okay,
the gin close-up and the wired branch, those were actually a subsequent photo shoot. Now, this day was a great example in that I'm lucky in that Daisaku spends a few weeks with me every year as his home base when he's in the Bay Area these days. And I was busy preparing other trees for the photo shoot. And I said, hey, Daisaku, do you want to work on this tree for the book? Because I want the book to be as good as possible. And why not have one of the world's best people work on a tree? And so Daisaku did all the work on this, and I credit him in the back of the book, but he did the work on that tree while I was probably helping the photographer do a whole bunch of other trees and prepping some of the other trees in the book on that same day because we had limited time. And it came out just fantastic. And so the joke is,
great vignette. Great.
So can we work on the tree and repot it and do all this work at the same time? Well, it depends, as you know. I wouldn't recommend a beginner do this extent of work on a single day. And I wish we'd spelled that out a little more. But when I asked Daisaku about it, he said, oh, probably won't die.
Oh no.
He said, oh, just put it in a greenhouse and mist it every 2 hours. And I said, oh, that makes sense. It's a juniper. I'll put it in a greenhouse and mist it for a couple of weeks. And he said, no, not for a couple of weeks, until spring, which was months away at the time. And I thought, okay, I'll just put this juniper under mist in a greenhouse for several months, and then it might not die. Coincidentally, I had just installed a misting system in a greenhouse, and I set it in there. And you know what? It didn't lose a branch. It was fine. And I've since seen him bare root junipers, removing 90% of the soil, cut off 2/3 of the branches. He's extremely careful about what to cut, but you just put it back on the bench, throw it in the garden. It's fine.
If right time of year, the right careful decision making, there's all kinds of things you can do that you shouldn't do.
If you have the decision making and the aftercare, that's the biggest part.
And
Yeah.
that's why we don't recommend this kind of thing, but it can
And
be
you're
done.
exactly right. It definitely can be done, and I'll never
Yep.
recommend it because
Right.
it literally comes down to which branches and roots you're cutting and how
Right.
you're literally handling it while you do the work and how you care for it afterwards. That's kind of the life or death difference.
Yeah. 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 Right. Right.
That's for the next book, though.
What's that?
That'll
So,
be for the next book.
the next book. Right. Right. Yeah. Daichan, boy, that'd be amazing to get Daichan involved with a book where he's doing like the majority of the wiring or something. That'd be an incredible book.
Well, so that's actually part of
That'd
my
be
secret
amazing.
plans is
All right.
I want to actually, that exact example, I want to, so those who don't know, Bonsai Today #1 is a wiring guide. And it's about 85% of a good starting point. And I want to rebuild that resource with Daisaku.
Mm.
And maybe even I'll get a separate photographer so I can be focused on what we're shooting. He can be focused on doing it. And then someone else can be focused on creating the images we need to show all that. And the 2 or 3 of us can do that as a team. But yeah, that's my secret plan. I want to make that happen.
Great.
I think that'd be such a valuable resource.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Would that be in book form or would you e-publish in some way?
Good
Any
question. Based on what comes out, I do want some photograph-based resource to come of that. I don't think video is the best for references because it's hard to, okay, which video is this in? At what point was that in? I think video is the best for showing overall processes and conveying the 3D and for allowing the conversation that naturally happens along with the work. But I think as a resource, and I love resources, and I think that does best in some kind of other resource. So whether it's online or in a book form, who knows? But I want to start designing. Actually, I need to make a shot list for that resource. And then next time I have the time with him, we'll identify a tree to sacrifice and cut some branches off and wire them up and see what we can do to make it work. Yeah, let me know if you're cutting any big branches off your best trees, because that'd be a really good example.
Okay. All right. We'll call you up.
Perfect. I'll be up there.
Wing you out here.
Exactly.
So the Little Book of Bonsai, this is a substantial little book in the hand for a little one. It's a hardcover book. Will there be a soft cover? I like the hardcover, but I'm curious whether there'll be a soft cover.
That's an absolutely fantastic question. That's kind of on the publisher end of things, so I have no idea whatsoever. Considering that it's already $15 cover price.
It's pretty low.
It's really low, and it's already competing with more expensive soft covers as it is. And so I don't know what their plan is. I don't even know how many they printed. I need to get an answer from them about that. I'm curious. I know that a lot of them have shipped, but I don't know how many are sitting in a warehouse somewhere.
Yeah. So where can you find it then? Is is this available everywhere?
Yeah, it's available
Feels
anywhere.
like it. Yeah. Okay.
So Stone Lantern has it. I have it on my website. It's on all of the online vendors. It's on Powell's Book Online. So all of the places where you're likely to see books.
Powell's. Excellent. Do you know Bookshop? Are you familiar with
it's in the bookshop chain, and it's actually in a ton of actual physical stores. Whether or not the stores are open, I don't know, but there are thousands of copies in stores across the country.
Oh yeah.
Across the world, really. Like we've got resellers in Australia, in South Africa. I've seen them pop up in different places in Europe. So they are out there.
Great. That is great. So I have really one last question, which you popped yesterday, which is, why is writing so hard?
It's funny. I felt doomed ever since I asked you that question yesterday, and I was thinking about it. I had a really pat answer.
Great question.
I touched on some of it earlier when I said things like, okay, how do you care for a bonsai? I'm not going to tell you what kind of tree I have or where I live, but just tell me, how do I care for it? And, how do you do that in a concise, or that exercise of, what does a bonsai look like? Like, that's a good, genuine question. knowing the different schools of thought about how to style a tree, I find that just challenging to come up with in awkward words, let alone in a nice, um,
Mm.
tight manner. One thing I could say is by way of an answer is I
Mhm.
learned what it means to be an editor by doing this book. And I realized I'm not an editor. uh, the questions that Lisa provided while I was working on this book were so good and practical. It was terrible because I could never get mad. I'd say, darn it, you're right. What would someone who doesn't know the first thing about this or that do? And just knowing, because she knows her garden stuff and she knows what a generic reader will bring to the book. And I'd say that's one thing that makes it hard is being your ideal reader and having that person in mind. It's the most basic, obvious stuff in the world, but I'm
Huh.
used to writing to the blog audience, and I also write starting with the photographs, where what have I been
Ah,
doing lately? How can I make that into a teachable moment? And so that's how I do a blog post. I've got photographs. What
right.
could I teach from those photographs? And then
Mhm.
I more or less fill in the gaps between the photos with words. And this
Mhm.
was such a different project where
Yeah.
it's what's the idea I want to convey? What's the most effective way to convey that? And now, how can we then fill in the space between the words with a photograph?
Right. The words kind of come first, which is why it was sort of
Yeah.
curious or ironic that you kind of needed a shot list first. but
Yeah.
but certainly, it definitely comes across the photographs are secondary to the information, supportive of the information. Although it doesn't appear that way when you're looking at the book, but clearly they are illustrative, rather than the other way around.
Yeah. And I think that's owing
Yeah.
to the layout. Again, Isabel did an awesome job with the
She
layout.
did. Yeah. Yeah. It's
But
beautiful.
it's funny. I think I enjoy the challenge of it. I feel like the book
Mm.
is
Hmm.
85, 90% of what I want it to be. And I think it might take double the effort to eke out the next 5 or 10% of quality.
Mm.
And so I think I learned that it's really hard to determine what effort goes into the book. And I was keenly aware of this as I was reading the radically changing drafts of your book, which just changed so dramatically from draft to draft. I don't know that mine went through such a radical transformation as much as it was more an issue of
That's
where's the
just poor
it's
writing.
well, it was very well, you had such a broad
I'm
scope.
scattergun.
You were trying to home in on 1,000, or not 1,000, but like what, 56 different ideas at the same time. And they were
Yeah.
standalone things that together tell a story. Whereas this one was, do we want the focus here or there? Is this
Mm.
balance? Do we have our audience in mind here? Which was just
Mm.
completely different scope. And
Mm.
I find
Mm.
effective writing really challenging. And it's one thing I like about Atlantic and Harper's is that
Mm.
you tend to find really good writing in there. And I'm such an appreciator of good writing. At any given time, I can tell you
Mhm.
there's kind of 2 or 3 writers who I actually really appreciate. So I think of the average
Mm.
Harper's or Atlantic writer as good, but the ones that really get me are like literally the tip top contributors over the course
Mm.
of a year. That's the stuff that I really, really love. And
Mm.
I just knowing what that looks like and knowing so clearly the gap between where I am and what that looks like, that's just a lifelong challenge. It'll be like trying to climb a mountain I know I'll
Mhm.
never climb, but
Mhm.
it's fun to be on
Mm.
the mountain.
Mm. I've heard other writers say that to write well, you have to read, not well, but read good writing,
Yeah,
read
you
good
have to see good
books.
bonsai to
Yeah.
make good bonsai.
Same process. Yeah. That 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 intuitiveness kind of
Yeah.
kind of comes in. Yeah. So you can find the Little Book of Bonsai nearly anywhere. And this is my recommendation title for anyone thinking about getting a bonsai, the gift for somebody who already has one. And also it's kind of a crystalline distillation of the major topics in bonsai. And as such, I think it's a great review for the more experienced. It's a stellar little book. And thank you so much, Jonas, for sharing your adventure with creating it.
Thank you so much. This was super fun to relive those now quaintly trying memories from the past couple of years. I'm very happy with where we are today.
All right. Thanks so much. We'll see you in another podcast. Cheers.
Thanks.
The music on today's podcast was brought to you by the fine folks at Blue Dot Sessions. Check them out at www.sessions.blue. Also, the advertisements are fake.
Cool. All righty then. So